Hey everyone, welcome to episode number 20 of the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Coates. Been a little under the weather the last couple of days, so my brain might be a little bit muddy. But I'm grateful to have someone I've been, following for a long time, but I haven't had a lot of an opportunity to engage with directly, and that's Nick Shaw, and he's one of the co-founders of Renaissance Periodization. Now, you should be familiar with Renaissance Periodization. Mike Isertel, his partner, and a lot of the other team. I've had a lot of his people on the podcast. I share a lot of their stuff on social media. And they don't pay me for this, but they're one of the brands that I most ardently believe is one of the greatest sources of evidence-based information in our space, and a brand that I openly promote because I believe in it. So meanwhile, it's great to have you on, Nick. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
You've got sort of an understated presence, especially when you compare it to your partner, Mike.
Yeah.
You're like sort of sitting into the background a little bit.
Yeah, it's really funny, I guess, because I've been on some podcasts that have had Mike on before too, and they're always just like, "Well, you guys kind of sound similar." I like to the best way to describe it is, Mike is more of I'm the yin to his yang, or vice versa, however you want to say that. So, he tends to get really fired up at times, and go on some rants and all that good stuff on podcasts, and that's great. A lot of it is really good stuff. Sometimes I'll just have to remind them to rein it back in a little bit, but for the most part, yeah, he's good, man. So sometimes people, I almost feel bad. I'm like, man, I think I'm going to be boring. It's like a guess, but that's how it goes. It's fine. I love Mike, man. I've known him for I don't know, 13, 14 years now, something like that. So it's been a while.
It's really obvious that you guys as a community are all pretty good friends, and I think it's part of what seems to make Renaissance Periodization work so well. I've actually had a number of guests who, like Mike, are very outgoing, entertaining, funny, certainly well spoken. But then I have a number of regular guests. Pete Dupuis of Cressy Sports Forum is a great example. Incredibly intelligent, well spoken, but soft spoken. And with Pete, you tend to just sort of sit back and hang on everything he says. Whereas I just had John Russin on, and one of the things I talked with Russin about is the fact that he's absolutely fearless and aggressive in his own self-promotion, right? Meanwhile, he's big on boosting his team that he's got. So you get all kinds of different personalities on air, and honestly, as long as someone has cool shit to say, everybody's worth listening to.
Yeah. I mean, I've always kind of just been, especially when it comes to the fitness space, all of our coaches are PhDs or registered dietitians, whatever, like, hey, they're the experts. And it's kind of funny because I won't really see myself as one. And so, people come to me, I'm like, well, go ask one of our coaches. Like, they can, probably go a little bit more in depth. Obviously I have a pretty good understanding of things, but that's just kind of how I have always been. Right. And I like to joke that, what's the exact saying? Something along the lines of, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. And I'm like, I've never really had to worry about that, because we have this awesome team. But I guess, more recently, the cool thing is, we've always been able to help a lot of people in health and fitness, nutrition, training, recovery, even, Dr. James. But we didn't have a lot of things that stepped outside of that space a little bit. And so I think that's a cool thing about the book that I've done. And so I've kind of had to step up a little bit more of the personal promotional side of things, which I haven't, ironically, I would use my own social media account the least. I was always more concerned about, our other two accounts, RP Strength and the RP Transformations one. So I'm having to kind of flip that switch a little bit in 2020.
And I wanted to talk to you about your book. So it was recently published, Fit for Success. I just started on a copy, and it starts out with some interesting stuff. It's it's got a forward, both your wife and what's gone on with your wife this year, and then Bob Harper, who's longtime celebrity trainer personality, and his fairly high profile major heart attack and recovering from it. But I did not realize until I read that Bob was a client of yours both before and after that incident. So you yourself too have coaching experience, a lot of it.
Yeah, so it just goes to show the importance of genetics when it comes to some of that stuff, because Bob Harper was in the best shape of his life. I had helped him go from like 200 down to 185. He jacked, six pack, He was training CrossFit all the time. Just he loved training really hard. He's like, fairly young, relatively speaking. He's like 50 or so when this happened. And, it came as a shock because, I'd helped him get in shape and we'd stay in touch a little bit here and there. But, when he had the heart attack 6 months after or whatever, he got done, finishing his diet phase. And I read that. And I'm just like, what? That can't be right. Like, there's no way that's him. And so, yeah, lo and behold, it was him. So I finally got in touch with him. I'm just like, dude, what happened? And yeah, it's just, he's got a family history of it, which is just really unfortunate. And even despite being in the best shape of his life, it still happened. So yeah, he had to really ease back into things after. And I actually had Dr. Spencer help a little bit because that's kind of right up his area of expertise too. And so we were able to help him get, back into decent shape and all that. And he's been a good friend that I'd stay in touch with. And, he's #1 New York Times bestseller from back in the day with some of his books and been on TV. So it's just really cool. And it's just really interesting how that all works because you would never expect someone that literally lives and breathes fitness for a living that something like a heart attack happens, right? And a very serious heart attack at that. So it just really, really wild. It really goes to show genetics.
Well, I can't say this with certainty, but you said in the book that he had or his own words were that he had a widowmaker heart attack that only about 10% of people survive. And, could his dedication to his fitness played a major role in the fact that he survived a heart attack that kills most people?
It would seem to make sense, right? If you have someone that's not in good shape, yeah, very well that could have been it. So yeah, I have no idea either, but it certainly seems pretty legitimate that could have been the case for sure.
Yeah, well, let's dive deeper into the book because literally one of the first things you write in there is it says, "It is my goal to help more than 1 million people around the world through my company." And you're an industry leader in both evidence-based coaching and education. So, you got to be approaching this goal, but also, where did this realization initially come from? Where did this ambition come from to build RP up into what it is and to scale beyond just the people you could personally coach one-on-one?
Yeah, well, man, there's a lot to unpack there. I suppose we'll try to do the quick version. So if we go back in time, I just always have loved fitness. Fitness has just always been part of who I am, what I do. And a big part of that is just the idea of in fitness, you never reach sort of like the end point, right? There's always more to strive for. There's always something to do to get better. And I love that idea. I love the idea of self-improvement and always getting better. And so I've always kind of had that mindset going back to high school. And then, I met Dr. Mike in college. He convinced me to do powerlifting. That's when I really got into it. I was like, yes, this fits me perfectly. This is what I want to do. That's kind of how RP got started in the first place. We started training together, became trainers in New York City after we graduated college. And he went back to get his PhD. I stayed, was training people in person. I was like, hey, we should do this online because he was already doing it. No one knew his stuff better than I did at the time. And so I started doing it and it kind of snowballed from there. And again, this was pretty early on in the social media days when Facebook was actually a decent place to be, and now not so much. And Instagram was barely there. So that's really how RP got started. And I think it just ties in perfectly the fitness evidence-based approach and the idea of self-improvement always getting better. Because even if you look at our flagship product, the RP Diet app, it's like the same idea applies, right? So you're always getting better. You're always putting in updates. You're always improving the app. And it's like, you look at fitness, you look at the app, you look at all this stuff, it just, all these principles tend to apply. And that was kind of this like light bulb moment I had earlier this year. I kind of had some rough ideas of, hey, like successful people do these number of things. And then I thought, well, I should put this in a pyramid, just like we do at RP, like we have everything else. The nutrition pyramid, recovery pyramid, training pyramid. I'm just like, I think there's something here to this. And so a little more backstory too. So in the preface of the book, my wife, she was diagnosed with breast cancer in January this year before COVID. So she had that, she had surgery, she had some complications from the surgery. She was in the hospital for like a week. So we dealt with all this before COVID, before quarantine hit. And, she's starting chemo after the first round, then COVID hits, shelter in place, all this stuff. It was just, you almost had to laugh because you're just like, I can't believe how much stuff is going wrong in the first 3 months of the year. And it would have been really easy to just go down that negative spiral of just like, oh, woe is me, all this bad stuff is happening. This is just really bad luck, whatever. And I just kind of really had to take some of these principles that, I'd already been thinking about and all that, but I really had to put them into practice. Like, there's so much going on. Everything can seem so overwhelming. I got to really be dedicated, disciplined to these principles that make people successful, because that's how you overcome. It's how you do better in business. It's how you do better in fitness or in sports or overcoming adversity and disease, like all these things. And that was a light bulb moment for me. I'm like, I think now, given 2020, everything that's happened, so many people have been negatively impacted. There's a really powerful message here in this book. And that's why I really wanted to get it out before the end of the year.
I've only gotten into a little bit of it so far, but I already get the sense that it's a little bit of Ryan Holiday's "The Obstacle Is the Way" meets Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl's real classic. That's an intense book, but the fundamental idea is the same, right? It's like you're choosing your attitude and your behaviors in the face of events totally beyond your control. And I mean, that's what this year's been. I plugged in with a lot of fitness professionals, and my year, despite the initial lockdown, all the crap that happened, after a very brief period of, okay, just binging TV, whatever, it's like, screw this. I'm gonna put a lot of effort into this year and grow on top of the good things that happened the last couple of years with published articles in this podcast. And I managed to blow up my social media a lot this year, and do a lot more writing, jumped into a lot more educational type stuff, and otherwise had a really good brand growth career year, where on the other side of all this stuff, as we get into the middle of next year and things open back up again, I put myself in a better position. And a lot of other people I know have done the same thing, versus the people who just said, fuck it, this sucks, and then just put their heads down and tried to ride it out, right? I mean, look at all the gym owners who've had to pivot, restaurant owners, you name it, who've had to pivot and do whatever the hell they had to do to stay alive through all this stuff. How many people went online into the online space? So your book seems to just hit the nail on the head with that.
Yeah. Well, so both of those books are quoted and referenced in my book, and you nailed it. Again, you have two choices when something bad happens. And you can play the victim card and you can say, oh, woe is me. There's nothing I can do. You can be helpless. I don't like that. I think that's a terrible approach. No, I don't agree with it. Like, no, I can respond to whatever's happening. I can find the silver linings. I can stay more positive. I can sort of focus on the things that I do have. And that's a good foundation to build from, right? Like, that's kind of one of the pillars: positive mindset, just being more grateful. Again, something like this happens with my wife. You just become grateful that, hey, we can still sit down and have family dinners. Like, I have two small kids. That was actually another thing too, because they were being homeschooled, and somehow my wife was able to help do that all through chemo, and I would help a little bit here and there, but it was really like I don't know how she did it. She's awesome. So yeah, you have two choices, and again, where does that negative downward spiral get you? It gets you nowhere, right? Like, why did you want to do that? You said it perfectly. The people that are successful, right? And this is like a universal trait. They have that internal locus of control. They're not going to focus on the things they don't have control over, because that gets you nowhere. Literally nothing good comes from that. So again, if something bad happens, okay, you kind of react and you think, what can I do now? I can't control it. I'm not really going to worry about it. But what can I do now, right? So my gym's closed. Okay, well, that's bad, you could say, especially if you're the owner of the gym. Even if you are just training there, okay, now what can I do? Can I train at home? Can I go outside and walk? Can I still do some sort of physical exercise? Can I control my nutrition? So a lot of people, this is really interesting. It was kind of this weird split. A lot of people are like, oh, don't worry about your nutrition at all. Like, there's so much bad stuff happening. Okay, I get it. I'm not gonna judge people, of course. At the same time, that is the one thing that you can absolutely control all the time if you want, right? You can always control what you're eating. And again, for a lot of people, taking some of that control back and having something you can kind of stand on, but yes, no, I don't care what's going on, all this bad shit's happening, I can still do this. It gives people confidence. They start taking more action. What happens when you get confidence? Again, momentum builds. That's just what happens. And so it's just like, for me, I was like, well, why would you want to just throw in the towel? Like, you still can control this stuff. And I mean, hell, you can work out from home if you really want. Yeah, you might not have fancy equipment, but like you can still do stuff. And so that's what successful people do. They find a way. They find a way. That's it.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm laughing because what you said about controlling your nutrition when you can't have access to the gym is literally the post I put up yesterday on my Instagram, and it got shared over 100 times because it seemed to have hit a nerve of people. So yeah, like what's the first thing that tends to go when people get away from the workout habit? Nutrition tanks, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and something weird that I've observed, and I think there's a relationship here. The clients that I've worked with who've had the best long-term major weight loss success were clients that actually had the nutrition in check before they started resistance training. Now we know that resistance training tends to motivate better nutrition, but the ones that really had the nutrition down first tended to be more resilient no matter what kind of consistency was going on in resistance training. So we know there's something there.
That seemed to make sense. They're probably, a bit more organized, or they probably have better environment around them, right? So if they're already doing better on their nutrition, because here's the thing, there's a lot of people that don't really set themselves up to even have a chance to be successful because their environment's just really bad. Like I like to consider myself someone that has a good amount of willpower and discipline. That being said, like if there's golden double stuffed Oreos in the house, forget about it. It's not even a thing. Now again, like, and I've competed in bodybuilding. I've done the hardcore stuff before. Like, yeah, I could have done it back then, but now I'm not really training for that. So it's just like, but if that stuff's around, I tell my wife, I'm like, just don't get it, right? And if it's not there, boom. So, and that's actually another thing too. And I'm sure you hear about this all the time with your own clients and stuff. But the clients that seemingly have the best discipline and willpower, they use it the least, and that's not a coincidence. It's because they set themselves up to have better habits and they have better environments and they can do all these things. So you just start looking at different things like that. It's just really cool to see, hey, what do the successful people do? And on the flip side of that, what do the unsuccessful people do? And if the inverse applies for both, you're probably on the right track. So in the RP Diet Coach app, we're able to collect a bunch of data from like 10,000 completed diets. Really cool. It's a pretty big data set. And we're able to see like what were the things that successful people did. They had the most success with their diet. And so, one of them is they don't set crazy aggressive goals, right? Like they can still be, tough goals to achieve. But on the flip side, we also looked at a bunch of failed diets. What were the people that failed at their diets? What were they doing? Well, they were setting the really long and aggressive goals. So you can set aggressive goals, but it's probably something you want to do in the shorter term. And hopefully you're a little bit more advanced. But like the people that failed, well, they set these crazy goals that are going to be really, really hard to achieve. They get into it, right? What happens? A couple weeks in, maybe the first week or two, they're really pumped up and they do well. And that's just like you hit that point where it's like, wow, I can't believe how hard this is actually going to be. What happens? You get discouraged, you fall off, then who knows? You probably don't even keep going. You fall back worse than where you started. And it's just, it's really something.
There's a couple of things embedded in all that. And, you didn't quite say it, but it was there, is these people are focused on an outcome versus the daily regular behavior, right? So they got the wrong thing in their focus. If you take a look at what's in your immediate control on a daily basis, you can successfully nail that down. If all you got fixated on is that long-term weight loss goal, there's nothing you can do to will that into happening on the time frame you want it to be. And like you said, they're more likely to fall off track. Something that I found in my experience when it comes to willpower is you can almost bypass willpower if the decisions that you need to make or trying to make are aligned with your identity, who you see yourself to be. I've worked with a number of police applicants over the years, and I noticed a very strong trend, and this is sort of where this coalesced for me. There were two types. One group were already living the active lifestyle that they imagined a police officer would live. And we're not talking about the stereotypical stuff from the old movies and donuts and whatnot, but in order to be able to pass this physical and be active. And those ones tended to crush the physical, right? They're already doing it. And there was a second tier that were nowhere near in the same shape. And they had this attitude, well, once I get in, I will then behave in this lifestyle this way. And they never did. They never passed the physicals. They never stuck with it. And when things got a little difficult, their willpower couldn't sustain them through the tough stuff. So I think if you really want to achieve something, if you can see and mold the identity, this, I like to use the term aspirational identity. So that way, when it gets a little tough, then you can look at it and go, this is part of who I am. I am someone who works out virtually every day. I am someone who is responsible with my nutrition. And then you don't have to rely on willpower as much.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And something I actually use this on my daughter. So my kids just went back to school recently, and my daughter, because they hadn't been at school since like March. And, I live in North Carolina, so they could have been going, but because given my wife's health conditions and stuff, like we chose to keep them home for a while until we were kind of at the point where we felt comfortable enough with it. And we know some people, whatever, but my daughter was really nervous. She's like, well, I'm not going to know anybody. I'm going to have a hard time making friends. She's 6, right? She's 6.5, let's call it. And so what I did is I would tell her, because I know she's a super friendly, super caring person. Like I just know that's just who she is. So I told her, I was like, you're the type of person that makes friends really easy. And I kept repeating that, right? Because I wanted to instill it in her head that like she would have that self-belief and confidence, that she would know it. And I think that's just what you were saying. Because if you believe it is like who you are, yeah, I mean, like you said, it's just, you don't even think about it. It's just like, oh yeah, like I'm that type of person. So you start training, you start watching what you eat. All of a sudden you gain that success, that early success, you gain some confidence, you get some momentum. And you're like, yeah, I'm the type of person that does healthy stuff. Yeah, that's awesome. Like, yeah, I'm a badass, right? Like you kind of start thinking that, and that's really cool. And like you want that, just like you said, because and again, like, you don't have to start with these crazy big things, but you just start with little things, build those habits, gain that confidence, momentum, and then naturally it's going to kind of build on itself. And yeah, I think you mentioned this earlier a little bit, but like if you start with lifting, all right, that's a fine place to start. But like you start lifting, you feel pretty good. You almost, as a natural byproduct, you'll want to start eating a little bit healthier too, because it just makes sense. The two just go together so well. So, I mean, knock on wood. So they just finished their first week this week, and she loves it. Like they're so happy to be back in school, and she comes home every day. She's like, Dad, I made new friends today. I'm just like, I'm trying to pat myself on the back just a little bit, but and you nailed it. So if you can convince people that it is part of who they are, it just things become a lot easier.
And I think this goes into another realm too, further than just fitness success. I mean, look at your community of coaches and RP. I mean, look at Mike. I mean, God, what did he just win a whole bunch of categories in his bodybuilding show? Right? You've had extensive experience in both bodybuilding and powerlifting. James competes. Melissa is, I know she's really
Black belt.
martial arts. But Gabby is, I think, has done aesthetic and powerlifting stuff. And Derek, when we were talking to him, he's what, the smallest man to ever squat 1,000 pounds. And these are
Yeah.
I know, right? So I know that fitness permeates your community along with high level academic achievement. So if you look at the success in the people in our industry who are successful, fuck it, Spencer Nadolski, right? He's shredded. I firmly believe there's a very strong relationship between the habit of fitness, being strong, and developing these dedicated habits that also translates into career pursuit. Right? I think there's
Yeah.
a massive relationship there.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think you nailed it. So I think there's maybe a couple of things to unpack there. It was like one, we kind of sought out people that could walk the walk and talk the talk. Like when we started RP, like that was really the idea. Mike was getting his PhD, and he was around other people like that. So it wasn't super hard to find folks like that, which is really cool because it's pretty uncommon, I would say, for someone to be like a competitive athlete and have a PhD, especially back then. Now it's maybe slightly more common, which is really cool to see. So yeah, and when you have that, when you have go-getters, when you have people that live and breathe it, right? Because they want to know more so they can improve their own abilities as well as their clients. That's a really cool thing, right? Very, very good. They're going to do better. And then because they're go-getters, right? Because they have a PhD, because they're go-getters in fitness and sports, well, you can be pretty sure, now you can't be 100%, but you can give these people a lot of autonomy and a lot of freedom because they are go-getters. You don't have to micromanage these people because there's a reason. If you're going to be successful, like, probably don't need someone standing over your shoulder all day. Whereas, if you're going with people that maybe aren't into fitness and, haven't really gone to school, because all these things require discipline and hard work and, grit to kind of get through it all over the years. Like these are all good, positive traits you want to seek out and folks that are going to work for you or work with you. I like you said, I think there's a reason, right, that they go together. It kind of makes sense.
Something I occasionally will do with a specific guest to point out to the audience. I hope everybody notices the way that, Nick, you use certain language, but you have repeatedly now made note of something that I have said versus, so you're drawing it back to me, and that's a sort of a humble and engaging quality. So when I notice certain guests have things like that, I like for the listeners to pick up on them a little bit because they're really positive traits. Dr. Jade Tata, who again highly educated, he's really someone that I like people listening to when he's on the podcast, because he just really makes it about the other person in any exchange, and he's inherently likable, and I'm sure that translates into a lot of success. So I have little doubt that that particular trait is a big reason why your team and your organization has thrived, because I think you guys are, PN is another big monster in our space, but you guys are one of the big dogs. And it's funny, I just had John Russin on, right, another highly educated guy, and we were talking about the future of education in this space. And I just recently finished a book called Post-Corona by Scott Galloway, and he's talking about the future of post-secondary education institutions and how a lot of them are going to be ripe for disruption because of the way that they're costed and scaling. And it got me thinking, and I don't know if you guys ever thought of this, and maybe you want no part of it, but you're a major educator. And I think that the future of a lot of the formal education that our trainers are going to get is going to drift more and more and more into the stuff that your organization is doing, PN is doing, John Russin is doing with PPSC. So could you guys ever go down a road to the point where you decide, hey, we could grow this into something that's actually like accredited? Because you literally, like Mike worked as a professor at Temple University for a while. So could there plausibly be something like that in the future, or even not going that far? Do you guys still want to, how far do you want to take the educational influence of Renaissance periodization?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I'm not really sure on the accredited part. I think we will see a lot more virtual stuff. I think that's a pretty good prediction, especially after now, because I think so many people were hesitant before 2020. Like, no, our company or the way we do things, we can't do it online. Well, that was wrong, because you could very quickly pivot and do things if you really need to. Funny story, my wife worked at a big law firm in New York City, and just still really good friends with a lady that works there. And I mean, they're talking about most people aren't going to be back in the office until probably like next fall, end of summer, something like that. And this is something where they would like joke about it before. They're like, we're wasting all this money on this like prime real estate in New York City, like the most expensive in the entire world. Why don't we have more people working remotely? And everyone just kind of poo-poos the idea, because like, no, because it's you're battling the status quo and such established traditions. But now people were forced to pivot, forced to do things. So I think definitely we're going to see a lot more online and virtual stuff. And I think most colleges are going to start doing that too. Like, I don't know, I would be nervous if I was in, commercial real estate and or, real estate in colleges, in college towns and stuff, because you might just, yeah, okay, maybe a little less in college because kids like to get together and party and all that. Like, there's probably a lot to that. And I'm sure there's even a lot to the social component, because I mean, we've always worked remotely at RP. We've always been remote. But even then, it's good, right? Because we weren't really impacted this year. But at the same time, like, there definitely is value in getting together with people face to face, seeing them, interacting them. And, like, I would like to do that, once a year, kind of meet up with a bunch of people. Like, I haven't been able to do that this year. It kind of sucks, but it is what it is. 2021, we'll get back to some of that. So, man, that's a really long-winded way to not really answer your question, but I do think it could be really cool. I don't really know what's in store, but we like educating people. We like helping people. Man, we just have so much free content on YouTube. Like, people can go there and just watch for days. And, here's the cool part. But some people would think like, oh, you're giving away too much free information. Like, that actually is the exact opposite thing that tends to happen, because you get people in and they like it. And they're like, wow, this is really great stuff. Like, these guys are really awesome. Like, people love Dr. Mike because of that. He's got so many free YouTube videos. And, one, like YouTube is becoming a real good place for this stuff because like, you can actually make a little bit of money on there from ads and stuff. But like two, you then get people that are just like, wow, like I love these people. And then, when you do have something that comes out, they're like, oh, like, yeah, like hell yeah, I want to go support those guys because, they have 100 hours of free content that, they've been giving to me. Like, yeah, I want to return the favor. So it is pretty cool to see. I really like the idea of education.
Well, and just to further that, right? Like when you guys have a book that comes out, I mean, of your stuff, recovery book that James Hoffman led is my favorite of them, just because it's world class, amazing, but there's nothing else out there like it, right? Renaissance Diet 2.0 is fantastic, and then the other materials, they're all great, they're fundamentally amazing. But the recovery book to me is the one that stands out that I honestly tell people, hey, listen, you guys have to go do this one because this shit just isn't organized in that form anywhere else, right? You could go and do Eric Helms, muscle and strength pyramids, and it's going to give you a lot of the same sort of stuff as the strength ones. And that's not to poo-poo that one at all. It's just say this is something that there's great information out there by really well-educated people. Talk about educators and athletes. Eric Helms is another fantastic example of this. But I push it all, but especially I like to point out the recovery book. So I hope if anybody listening, they dive into your book right now, Fit for Success, which I still want to talk about a bit more, but also just go check out the recovery book. It's just good. It breaks down some of the myths on just how good like heat and cold therapy recovery modalities are. They're definitely not magical stuff. So they get oversold in the popular media and on social media when celebrities use them. Misunderstanding.
Yeah, totally. There's not really, I don't really know of any books that really cover recovery. I don't really know of any. It's actually probably a pretty good sign. So my book was kind of our first experience with selling on Amazon, being hardcover, being paperback. Like we did a little bit with RP Diet 2.0, through a publisher. But yeah, it seems like this could be a cool avenue. I think a lot of people like reading, something tangible in their hands versus ebooks. A little bit of a difference, and I actually tend to agree with that. Like I only really read books in my hand. Like I don't know. I probably get too distracted if I'm reading digitally. I just can't really do it. So yeah, it's one of those things where the recovery book it could be, I think, a really great resource on a place like Amazon because there's not really anything else like it out there. So it can do really well. It's actually on Audible. I think it's on Audible. I think it does pretty well on Audible. I think that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know some of the other books are. I do either physical in-hand books or audio. So I really got to want to read something if I'm doing it in an electronic form. There's a few that I've done, but and your guys' stuff is amongst that. So with Fit for Success, why did you write it? Why was this so important to go off in a slightly different direction from the stuff that your team is usually writing?
Yeah, so two things. So we go back to 2020, just been a shitty year for everyone. So I think a lot of people just need something like this, an easy to digest look at what are the things that I need to do to get back on track, to overcome adversity and obstacles. Like, what do I need to do to become successful and sort of get over this 2020 hump? And so that's why I was really passionate about making sure that it came out before the end of the year. So it just came out in November, right around Black Friday or whatever. And so, I mean, super happy with the feedback so far. Like, people seem to really like it. Here's the other thing. Like, I didn't want it to be kind of, and I don't mean this as a negative against other RP books, because a lot of people like reading that stuff, but I didn't want it to be something like super long and, tons of citations. Like, no, like it's meant to be a very simple and easy to read book. Because for the most part, that's what people want, right? People want that. They don't want to spend, hours kind of reading, scientific stuff. No, a lot of people do in our community, of course, but like we start stepping outside of that, people don't want that. People want, kind of be spoon fed. So the idea is to keep it simple. I wanted a take home thing at the end of each chapter. Like, there's just something quick and easy you can do at the end of each chapter. If you just start doing these little things, you're going to be much better. You're going to be on the right track. So that was one part of it, helping people overcome that. Two was really a little bit of, we have fitness, we have diet, we have training, we have recovery books. We don't really have anything that talks about a little bit of the mental component, or how do you deal with setbacks and things like that. And that's what this book is, because again, if you want to be successful in any endeavor, there are universal principles, and that's what the book covers. That's really why.
It definitely feels so far from what I can see from it, it belongs more in the same space as something like Obstacle is the Way versus
Yeah.
your other work anyway. And just to comment about, the people who, like reading, citations and research type stuff, that's the community that you're around. Like Mike,
Yeah.
that's kind of a self-selecting thing that's in that world.
Yeah.
So you have to step outside and realize, wait a minute, not everybody else necessarily is interested in filing for research, right? I leave it to people like Mike to figure that stuff out and then process it in an accessible form so I can take it and then share it and use it with my clientele.
Totally. Most people just want something quick, simple, easy to read that has some story behind it that packs some punch, right? And I even say in the book, like, if I would have tried writing this a year ago, it could have been done, but I really had never had that like back up against the wall type thing where just everything seemingly was going wrong. And so I'm super fortunate, of course, but like this year forced me to really kind of deal with all that. Kind of like, how do you best deal with all that? Hopefully it's addressed, very well in the book, because it's just like, you do these things, you're going to be on the right track. Like, it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter where you're starting from. You just start small and you just start doing these little things that are at the end of each chapter. That's how you get started on the road to success.
Something that I like, for me personally, I try to encourage other young emerging trainers who are coming up, is I like plugging into a number of people in the fitness industry who, thankfully, a lot of mine met along in my travels, but who are hard workers. Work ethic was one of the main things that's in your book,
Mhm.
and people who have the same attitude that you described in what we've talked about so far here. And I find if you're plugged into those examples and those images, it can be easier to then be, for lack of a better word, motivated, reminded of this perseverance to continue to work hard at what you're doing. And I think it can be very easy to see someone who's been very successful in our space as being, oh, I could never be like that. That's unattainable. But instead, I look at those people and go, okay, well, you just apply the same principles, and they were once right where every other trainer. You once upon a time were just a trainer starting out, right? I doubt at the very beginning you could have imagined what you guys would have founded and built with RP.
It's exactly the case. That's the thing, and I still sort of view myself like that. And it's just weird how things kind of, and this is a pretty natural human thing, right? Like, even as you maybe become more successful, like, you just kind of start looking up and you kind of start basing off of other things. Like, I don't know, that's at least how I am. Like, whatever. Have we had a little bit of success? Okay, sure, I guess. But like, I sort of see it as like, we're, nothing. Think of all these huge, gigantic companies that help, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions of people. I'm just like, that's the guiding star right there. Like, we want to help as many people as we can. So it's just, I think it goes back to that mindset that we started the podcast about. It's just like, you just always want to get better. Now, that's not to say, like, I'm super happy and grateful for where we are, and we've helped lots of people. I love it. I think it's great. But at the same time, I'm just like, that's nothing. Like, I think there's so much more out there. Like, that's just kind of how I view things. And yeah, for anyone out there that's just getting started, I mean, here's the thing, because with social media, you tend to only see little bits and pieces, right? It's not like 8 years ago, I was posting on social media about like, oh, hey, I just got like my first personal training client, like, woo. When Mike and I first started writing online diet training programs for people, maybe we charged $75 a month for like a diet and training program, right? Like, let's call it 2012. What's that run for now? I mean, and not even here, but just like anyone, right? Like, you're not gonna find that. But again, like, that's just how we got started. You gotta start somewhere. You gotta start with do a good job, get some testimonials, build up a little social proof. And again, it takes a little bit of success to build more of it. So that's a really weird concept, because people like to think that they're going to jump from 0 to 100. It's just like, boy, that's just not how it works. And I even have to remind myself of that. Like, yeah, guess what? Okay, so you wrote a book. Like, now you have to put in years of hard work now with that. So, like, hopefully let people know that it's out there. There's usually not something that's just handed to you overnight.
No, and mean, this year has been a really cool year for me. And it's the year that, again, I grew to my social media following. I just reached 10,000 followers. And I was one of those people that, oh, I never imagined I could have any sort of presence on social media. Actually, Mike Isertel had a big hand in that because he kept sharing my stuff on his wall. So he kept giving me major surges of followers. But I've got all these younger, newer trainers who see this, and I'm hoping they'll learn from it because I've been trying to document the process. But keep in mind that this stuff happened in year number 10, right? I started writing for T Nation at the end of 8 years of training. I was completely unknown in any way, shape, or form in this industry for the first 6.5 years of my career, working on a gym floor, busy with clientele, good referral base. But beyond that, there's absolutely nothing in terms of broader career capital out in the grander industry. So there's a lot of people plugged in this stuff, hoping in year 1 and year 2 to be able to achieve a lot of these same sort of things. So it's like, guys, put in the work, be patient, persevere, right? Work for it. I mean, fuck, if you get there quicker, I think that's wonderful, but just don't expect it to happen overnight, like you said.
So something that successful people tend to have is a longer term time horizon. They just sort of understand. Again, it goes back to a little bit. You mentioned this about the process. Okay, you can have these outcome goals that you want, and that's okay. Whatever your big, hairy, audacious goals or whatever, like that's okay to have this big kind of guiding North Star that helps steer the ship, so to speak. But at the same time, you have to have these little smaller goals. Like, what are you going to do today? What are you going to do? What's the goal? What's your goal to get done today? Get done this week? And again, you just have to start there, and you have to start building there because so many people want to jump from 0 to 100. And it's just, if I had, that would be like the one thing that I would say that really stands out to me. The more and more that I look into all this and study successful people and all that, it's just like, you don't see all that hard work for years. Like, no one sees your 6.5 years of training people in person. No one sees that Mike and I were training people in New York City. Like, we used to get made fun of for the way that we did things. I still remember that. It's never going to leave me. We used to get made fun of by other trainers for the way we did things. I'm like, we had a plan. We had a long-term plan. We were just like, let's just keep doing this. And at the time, like, it was because we wanted to be bodybuilders. Well, like, Mike has become a bodybuilder. This is, 2009. Let's call it 2010. So 10 years later, he finally just won a bodybuilding show. That's 10 years of busting his ass. And I've seen a large chunk of that. I know how hard he worked, but it's not like he just showed up one day. He's not genetically sort of gifted in terms of bodybuilding. No offense out there, Mike, if you're listening, I love you, buddy. But like, he'd be the first one to say it. It's not. It's just not how it works. And think about how many subway trips I had to take down from, way up Upper East Side down to Midtown Manhattan to train people. No one's ever going to see that stuff. And they might just see something now. There's like, oh, like people like to do that. Like, oh, he's just lucky, or, he's like genetically gifted or whatever. It's like, no, I mean, maybe 1 or 2 people out there. But even then, right? Like, you take the best in the world, take someone like Kobe Bryant or Michael Jordan. It's like, yeah, they had talent, but these guys were they would make me look like I'm lazy, right? And that's what it takes if you want to be the best. You have to have sort of some of that natural innate ability. Then you have to have this tireless work ethic that gets compounded on top of that. That's how you really get to the top, to the elite top I'm talking.
Yeah, you have to be willing to outwork literally everyone.
Yeah. Well, so real quick, I have another story. So I was doing a podcast with Nick Hardwick. He was a former All-Pro lineman for the San Diego Chargers. He was a walk-on in college. Somehow, made it. I don't even know how. It's a crazy story. But I asked him. He was 14 years in the NFL. I asked him. I was like, "Who is the one person that, like, they were just the ultimate professional?" And he said, Drew Brees, right? And everyone knows who Drew Brees is. He's one of the best quarterbacks of all time. But he went on to say, like, this guy never stopped working. He's 5'11", 6 foot, right? He was not meant to be this Hall of Fame quarterback. He's got like the most passing yards in NFL history. Prepared like the world is ending. And he does this every single day, repeatedly for now like 20 years. I want to say he came in the league in like 2000 or 2001. Like these things are just absolutely remarkable, and just people don't understand that. I've had you know, the the ability, right? I'm super grateful to be able to work with some of the best athletes in the world that I've been able to coach, and you just watch their work ethic. Someone like Rich Froning, like, are you kidding me? This guy works out like 4 or 5 hours a day, every single day. People want to be like, oh, I want to be a CrossFit Games champion or whatever. No, you don't. You don't actually want it. You say that you want it, but you don't want to do the stuff that's required. Like you're not going to be doing the stuff that Rich Froning is doing. Like you're not. You're not going to do that. Like stop. Don't even say that you want it because you're lying.
You guys have another really cool and uniquely high profile athlete in your in your in your community, and that's Ethan Suppley. And I've been a fan of Ethan in movies when he was, that, let's just say, a big fat guy in movies like, God, he was in the movie Blow early on as Tuna. He was Johnny Depp's friend, or Mallrats as the guy who couldn't see the sailboat in that picture. If anybody gets those references, right? So, and he's famous for being that guy. And then he sort of turns around a few years. And what's the other one? My Name is Earl with Jason Lee, I think. So anyway, but now, my God, he's completely turned his life around. He's jacked as hell, and he's one of your guys' flagship people all over your media. So, have you worked with him closely yourself?
So Jared did. So Jared Feather did. He kind of just listened to a video that Mike had done, a TEDx video talk, Understanding Healthy Eating, TEDx, I want to say Springfield University. And it's just one of those things where you can hear something 100 times, but one day you just hear it and it just resonates for whatever reason. And that's what happened to him. And he sort of heard it and he understood it, and he stopped blaming food. He sort of took some internal locus of control, if you want to go back to that, one of the things in the book. And he started to change. And he was already on the right track. He'd already lost some weight, but that was able to take him from, sort of those average results to like the next level, right? It's now, he's went from 550 pounds to 250 now, like really jacked. So it's really cool to see. But again, even with that, so I chatted with him on a podcast before, and it was, he's tried every single diet out there. Not even joking, like every single diet. I mean, he listed them all. He listed like 100. I was like, oh my God, like I didn't even know some of these things were even an actual thing. I thought you were joking. But you don't see that. You just see kind of where he's at now. And you're like, wow, like that's really cool. How'd you do it? You don't see it in like 5 or 10 years where he just, fucked everything up repeatedly over and over. And hopefully it's okay to swear on here.
Absolutely. Why did you didn't?
Yeah, you've had on mic before, so I know it's okay to swear because he's basically a sailor. So it's just really funny, man, because people don't see a lot of that stuff. And again, it's presented that way on social media for a reason, right? Like you only see little bits and pieces. And a lot of times, because it actually goes back to internal locus of control. You see something on social media, now you're kind of giving your power away because you're focused on what they're doing. It's like, well, you can't control what other people are doing, so don't worry about it. Like they are who they are. Let them go do them. If you want to use that for inspiration to get going, great. Now look back into yourself and internally be, okay, well, now what can I do about it? Like, yes, I'm going to go back to that system and the processes that you talked about. Outcome is a long ways away. Well, let's get back to the systems and the outcomes right now, because that's what we can do. That's what we control today.
I think Ethan in particular is great because you mentioned Rich Froning, who seems superhuman, and Jared Feather, another one of your team, seemingly superhuman, gifted genetics on top of work ethic, right? I mean, you could say that about Jared. I think
yeah.
In my mind, he seems like he's very gifted. You got Charlie Young, or how many other people? Even fucking Mike. Mike is terrifying. Mike, I'm 8 inches taller than Mike, and we weigh the same thing most of the time, and I'm a fucking large human. So that's not normal. But Ethan is somebody that people could see and go, oh man, like I can relate to that. Or he's further gone than what a lot of people even saw themselves, and he could turn it around. So he's the guy that they can grab onto and go, okay, shit, if he can do that, I can do that. Right?
Yeah, I think that's why so many people are fascinated by stories like that. Or, if someone's like really down in the dumps and they kind of make their way back up. Like people are really inspired by that stuff. And I think it is because it's so easy to relate to that. Because we've all had bad stuff happen to us before. it's like to see someone sort of pick themselves off the ground and come from nothing to, rise to something that's really cool. Like it just clicks. It just makes a really good, compelling story. So when you see someone that's like, holy crap, maybe it goes back to some of that identity that you were talking about, because you can see yourself in that person. So let's take some random, like, fitness soccer mom that's just getting into lifting. She's going to see Jared just be, I don't even know what that is. Like, that's not even human. So you can't see yourself in that. So it's not really, you're not going to use that. Like, you see someone like Ethan, or maybe you see a mom that's lost like 100 pounds over a few years and all this, like you see that and you're like, that can be me. So that's what's really cool, because, even on the RP social media, we'll get people that tag us all the time that have, used their products and gotten in shape and all that. It's really awesome. But like, there's a pretty diverse group of people. It's like moms coming back from having babies. It's, pro athletes sometimes. Like, if you look hard enough, you're going to find someone that's similar to you.
And I think, with that identity thing too, you look at Ethan, and I have to believe his identity as to who he is as a person is totally transformed. He is almost certainly someone who is a diehard fitness enthusiast and who is in control of his nutrition, versus probably someone who, had no relationship with any of those things for a long time, right? So I suspect there's definitely a strong relationship there. Before I let you go, I don't want to steal too much more of your time, because I can hear your kids going nuts in the background.
Oh man, I was wondering if you could hear that cheese. I think
I
my sister here.
That's great. You bag it away. One of the questions I like, especially, I have my buddy Mike Dola on from Stronger You, or anybody else who kind of runs one of these companies. Like, what isn't so easy or glamorous about running a company like RP? You've got almost 50 team members. I think you said 45 in the book. Maybe it's grown. And the stuff that the onlookers outside don't understand.
So something that I just had not really had to do a whole lot of before, as the team kind of grows and expands a little bit, just having to kind of manage people a little bit more. And we used to be pretty hands off. Like, hey, coaches, you just kind of do what you do and all that. And the coaches are pretty good. They're pretty kind of hands off, and because they all do a great job, of course. But getting into more like the app side and marketing and all these different things, like, yeah, I kind of do a little bit less of like, have your hands down there, whatever. And it's just like having to manage people a little bit more. And that's been a little bit of a challenge in terms of what there's always something. There's always something that comes up. Doesn't matter who you are. So there's a chapter in the book. It's all about failure. And I don't care who you are. I don't care what company you are. You're going to fail. You're going to mess up. Right? Sometimes there might be smaller things. Sometimes there might be bigger things. But it always happens. And there's always stuff, right? And seemingly you can have the best plans and timelines laid out, but stuff's going to happen. Because we're human. Things are going to happen. Maybe it's human mistake. Maybe it's COVID-19. Like, who knows, right? This year's been the probably, hopefully, outlier that our whole lives that we'll ever see. So it's really hard to plan for some of that stuff, but you just kind of have to plan that there's going to be something unexpected that happens. And sometimes I think people don't see that or realize that, because you might not see it from the outside, but I guarantee it, every other company, and sometimes, actually, I'll tell you a real quick story. Sometimes for me, talking to other entrepreneurs, I don't want to say it makes me feel good, but it just kind of makes me feel like, okay, it's not just us. When I talk to other people and they say like, oh yeah, we've had that happen before. Oh yeah, no, we dealt with that before. And I'm just like, well, thank God it's not just us, because boy, I thought it was just us. And then you talk to other people and it's comforting. I don't know. That's a weird thing to say, I suppose, but maybe that's the best term here. So it doesn't matter who you are. There's always going to be stuff that happens, gets messed up. And successful people, when they experience failure, they just get back up and they keep going. And they'll usually learn something from it. So hopefully that doesn't happen again down the road. It's not that they're never going to experience failure, because they are. But a lot of unsuccessful people might not ever even get started, because they think if they fail, like, that's it. And that's just not the case. Like, you just have to be able to roll with it. And going back to, Obstacles Away that you mentioned, that's a really good book. I would say, hey, go read that, because that's just what happens. Things happen and you just see obstacles as opportunities. And boom, it happened. Okay, well, what do we do now? pivot, get around it, whatever.
One of the easiest and most accessible examples of this, and something you mentioned earlier, is Michael Jordan. People often usually think that he's the greatest basketball player of all time. People argue about that a little bit. I grew up watching him, so it's my vote, right? And he was indomitable. But people forget, I believe it's the first 6 seasons of his career, he didn't win a championship, and I believe got beaten by the Pistons most of those years in early rounds of the playoffs.
And Celtics, yeah.
And Celtics. And the Pistons in particular are legendary for just beating the living crap out of him. But he's also legendary for working tirelessly to be better so he could overcome the Pistons. A big part of it that doesn't always get talked about is the fact that the team needed those extra pieces to help push him over the edge. But he has legendary work ethic to be able to be better so that way he didn't get beaten by these guys, and eventually went on to win all those championships. Fucked off for a couple of years and tried baseball, just because he could do that. Came back, it was just as good as ever, won 3 more championships. But people also forget, the very end of his career where he went and played for other teams, or the very beginning where he was a dominant individual player, but his teams didn't win. So it's easy to see all the good stuff. And I'm sure with you guys being, like in our space, a pretty heavyweight brand, it's easy to gloss over the fact that you guys have probably hit little stumbling blocks along the way.
Yeah, that's an understatement. So the going back to that Michael Jordan documentary, did you watch that?
I did not. I heard a lot about it.
Oh man, you have to go watch it. So because I thought you were going to mention this. So he gets shit kicked out of him by the Pistons a couple of years in a row, and he even before that, what year was it? I'm actually a real big Michael Jordan fan. Maybe it was like 87. He averaged like 37.1 points a game, just ridiculous season. So he dropped 63 on the Celtics in the playoffs, and they still got beat. Like, that's just unheard of. But anyways, he gets the shit beat out of him by the Pistons. So what's he do? He starts really like seriously lifting for the first time, and they document that in the series. And I was like, okay, that's awesome. Because he knew, he's like, I gotta get stronger. He's like, I need all this stuff. And then what happens? He's able to kind of take some of that abuse, and it doesn't get him down as much. Lo and behold, now again, that's not the only reason, of course. Then they beat the Pistons, and then it's like boom, they're over that mental hump, they're over that mental hurdle. Then they go on to win 3 straight, crush it, whatever. And then because he's Michael Jordan, he's actually like he could have been a pretty decent baseball player. Like that's unheard of to go from not having played for like over a decade to. I mean, imagine any other player trying to do that. They would bat like 50, not 50%, no, like 0.05, right? Whereas like a good batting average in the major leagues is 250, 300. Like I want to say he was batting around 250 in the minors, which is just crazy.
Yeah, and people, the other more recent examples, Tim Tebow, who's been in the Mets organization for years after this sort of quirky little, season or two in the NFL. And I always liked Tim. Tim's actually, he's not a superstar, minor league baseball player, but he's actually done really well for a guy who, had a stint in NFL. There's actually a number of these. One of Michael Jordan's more well-known opponents is Danny Ainge. And Danny is actually considered to be, for anyone who knows this, one of the most well-rounded athletes in any sport. He was completely dominant in every single thing he touched. He had a long NBA career. He played for the Toronto Blue Jays in Major League Baseball. So there's a number of these cool examples. And, you look at Ainge, and he's a gangly-looking white guy, not this thoroughbred-looking athlete, and yet he's still one of the best athletes in the history of all modern sport.
Yeah, it's wild, man. I mean, some people they are a little bit more blessed, but even if you are really blessed and you don't have that work ethic, you're probably still not going to end up anywhere good. So it takes more than any one thing to be successful. That's kind of the key takeaway.
And I think ultimately all the examples we've used, it does come down to work ethic and drive and all these principles that I know you've lined out in the book. So I definitely want people to check out your book. Let's let people know where to find you online on social media.
Yeah. So, today's a good day to talk about it, actually. So, on Amazon, the book just hit #1 new release in self-help genre, which is really cool, man. It's really an honor to kind of be up there, because like some of these people that you're talking about and some of the people that are referenced in the book, I'll be looking through the rankings on Amazon, and I'm just like, I'm like, what? I'm next to the Ryan Holiday or somebody. I was like, this is wild. So, Fit for Success, you can pick it up on Amazon. It's on Amazon Prime. It's on Amazon Kindle. So if you have Prime, you can get it pretty quick and be there, for the holidays. And for anyone that does get it out, just thanks in advance. I really do appreciate it.
Cool. And your social media?
RP Strength is probably our main one, and then just at nick.shaw.rp is my personal one.
Awesome. No, guys, seriously, go follow Nick. I really enjoyed this episode. I'm really grateful that we finally got you on, because I know Mike had, a few years ago told me if I ever wanted to have you on just to talk to him, but this has been a real treat. And for everybody listening, thanks again for continuously showing up to support. If you haven't yet given my podcast a review, I'd love that. That would be super cool. If you're driving, maybe try to remember this shit. I don't know. I listen to these ones. Don't do it while you're driving. I hope that common sense. And if you're someone who has found this from Nick's Media and you're listening to what I'm doing here for the first time, I do plan on having Gabrielle Fundaro up in the not terribly distant future. I just had Derek Wilcox on. Mike Izertel was recently on again. He's been on a bunch of times if you go back through the old library where I had my friend Dean Guido as a co-host. And, I've had James Hoffman on. We love your team. I've even had Carolyn McDonald, who is a very good friend of mine. And I know that she's been terrorizing your organization behind the
scenes. She's a very hard worker. There you go. If you want to talk about work ethic, there you go.
That she cares a lot about making sure everybody, that she cares a lot about doing a really great job. She wants to like her, and that's, if anything, that's the word I'm looking for, a failing almost, that she really does care to make sure that people like what she's doing in her effort. Wonderful human being. She's probably going to listen to this, so I'll probably hear about it. Anyway, brother, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it. And hang out for a second off air. Meanwhile, I've got Nick Winkleman up next. If scheduling all works out, he is scheduled. We had to reschedule once, and I really like Nick, and he'll be a first-time guest. So everyone, take care, and thank you again.